Okay, here we are. We've got everything cut out for our doll. We need to start sewing it together. Now, I do occasionally use a sewing machine, but I prefer most of the time when I'm sewing my dolls, I sew by hand. I really enjoy it. I do a lot of embroidery work. You can see here, this is my embroidery floss box. Not everybody has something like this. So if you want to use embroidery floss, which I think looks nicer, you can purchase it. DMC floss is relatively inexpensive, and it's got a ton of different colors. So you can very easily purchase DMC floss. Now, if you really don't like working with floss, you can use thread with this for this this doll, but you're just going to want 2 strands, so you'll need to double it over. It's not going to hold quite as well, and I don't think it looks as pretty as the floss does. So we're going to be sewing. I'm going to show you 2 different kinds of stitches that you can use with the dolls. We're going to be working on 2 different dolls for this one. I have a little red kitty and a little purple kitty. I'm going to be using a running stitch on one of them, the red, and then I'm going to be using a whip stitch on the little purple one. And remember, you're going to need to have some scissors, and you can see I've got my floss that I've chosen because I'm going to go ahead and use floss. And with the DMC floss, it comes in the strands of 6. So you're going to want 3 of them. 3 strands to go around your doll, and 3 strands to sew your arms and your ears and your tail. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the whip stitch first. And it's kind of hard to see, but you can see here, if I separate it out a little bit, you can see that there are 3 strands there. And I've got a number 5 embroidery needle that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to get this threaded up. There we go. And you always want to make sure that you do a really nice knot in the end, because you don't want it to come out. My rule is I always do a knot with 3, and then I trim it really, really close because I don't want it to pull through, so you can see about how big that knot is. Felt is a little bit more porous to work with, so you want to make sure you've got a really good knot. And I've got a fairly long piece of embroidery floss. If you find this a little intimidating, I usually use really long pieces. You use a piece of embroidery floss that's at least 24 inches long when you're sewing. Now I'm going to show you, get this out of the way, we're going to do the whip stitch first. So I'm going to do my little arms. And I put the little arms together. And I want you to see how I'm holding my hands. I will put one finger on top and my thumb here, so I've got fingers together holding the felt together. And I'm always checking to make sure that the felt edges match. Felt can sometimes slip a little bit off, and then you're sewing and it turns out you're sewing only a little bit into this side. So I'm always making sure and making adjustments that I've got everything together. So that's why I use my 3 fingers and my thumb to hold this down. I'm going to come from the back and sew through so you can see where the knot is. Don't worry about that knot being there. It's going to be in the inside of the doll. And then basically I keep coming through and I'm making loops with the fabric. Now if you have really long thread like I do, I tend to pull it through a little more slowly. Otherwise you're going to get what I call stupid twist knots that are really, really super annoying. And again, I always keep those fingers there, because if I start holding it back here, number 1, I'm going to start sewing through at a weird place. This makes sure that my stitches are even. I'm coming in at about the same depth. Now, don't have a heart attack if you get a knot that looks like that. All you have to do is, first of all, relax a little bit, give it a little pull on one side, and it'll usually pop apart. If you start pulling on it too tight, that's when it gets completely knotted, and there's no way that you're going to be able to salvage what's going on. I learned that from a lady that I worked with years ago who also did a lot of embroidery work, and I told her that found it very frustrating, and she said, you just have to calm down when you get a knot. Just calm down. Now, as you're working around, you can see I've still got those fingers and I'm holding everything close together. While you're looking at this side, if things aren't completely even or you need to trim a little bit with your scissors, trim that up before you get around. And then just keep sewing all the way around the edge. And you'll start to really get the feel of it. There's a nice rhythm to it. And you can see I gave that a little pull. Can you see the stupid knot? I call all knots stupid knots, but I hate these stupid twist knots. They drive me nuts. And sometimes I find myself, if I'm in too much of a mood where I want to hurry on things, embroidery is not the work to do. Sewing by hand is not the work to do when you're in a hurry up kind of mode. It just doesn't fly. So again, remember, I'm keeping can you see those fingers? Fingers and my thumb. And I actually kind of rest my needle on that finger and push through. And I do that all the way around the edge. Okay, now here we are coming to the end. And I need to tie this off. So what I do is I put my needle back through, and I've got a loop. I'm not going to pull it tight. I put my needle through it and pull, and then I'm just going to do the thing. I usually do it 3 times. Once doesn't seem like enough. 2, the knot might fail. 3rd, I do just to make sure that it's not going to come out. And then I snip it off, and you can see I've got the little piece sewn together. That's the whip stitch. Okay, now the little purple kitty, we did a whip stitch. I'm going to show you a running stitch. Running stitches are a little easier, well, actually a lot easier. But if you're doing this project, say with a child, it's a much easier stitch to show them, and then they can work up to the whip stitch. Now again, I have my embroidery floss, and I have 3 strands of it, and I chose it in a slightly darker color so you can see it a little easier. And then remember, I've got that knot there in the end. So what I'm going to do is make sure that my felt is lined up, and I've got my fingers there. So I'm going to poke through the back side, make sure my knot's on there. Now I want to make sure that those sides are lined up. Can you see here where this kind of pokes out a little bit? Remember, you can always take your scissors and kind of snip things to make sure they fit. That's one of the things I love about felt. And then all I'm going to do is a running stitch is simply stitch in from the back to the front. The thing that you want to try to make sure of is that your stitches are even. Sometimes that can be a little hard, and you can see I'm resisting the urge to poke it in. Sometimes this will work with felt, and then other times not so much. Especially when you're dealing with wool felt, 1 stitch at a time seems to be the best way to do it. So again, it's pulling from the front to the back, and then pushing forward with your needle to the front. I feel like when you do 1 stitch at a time, you can be much more careful in your stitch length, and you have to kind of slow down. Again, needlework is not something you do when you're feeling rushed or kind of in a bad mood. Now I'm going to turn this over. Can you see here where one piece is just a little bit bigger than the other? Now, we're not going to have a heart attack about that. I'm just going to take my scissors and trim it up. I'm always flipping my work from the front to the back to make sure I'm not going to have any areas like that. So I'm going to flip it back around. Okay, back. And I want you to notice something. I pull it through a little bit and then come back and pull the rest of it through. That can help you not get those, what I call those stupid knots. I also cut this floss just a little bit shorter. I know that sometimes when I'm working with younger kids, sometimes they're afraid they're going to poke themselves with the needle. They shouldn't have, nobody should worry about that. Because really, it's just going to hurt for a second anyway. Okay, through. Now remember, we want to tie this off at the end. So here's what it looks like. And then I'm going to tie it the same way that I did the whip stitch knot. So I'm going to pull it through. Can you see the little loop? Take my needle and pull it through. There's the beginning of my knot. And then I'm going to poke it through again. There's my loop again. There's my second knot and third, just to make sure it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, and then I clip it. And then there is the running stitch. Now, so you can see a comparison of both of them side by side. The running stitch is the one on red, and the whip stitch is the one in purple. Okay, and in the next video, I'm going to show you how to pin together your doll, and or stuff your doll and then pin it together, and then sew it.